We have a very full evening tonight, so I'd like to get us started right about now. So, I just heard a cell phone, so that means all of you should now be turning off your cell phones and putting them in silent mode, which I will do myself. So, is that better? Okay, good. I'm Dave Nichols. I'm Vice Chair of the Genesee Valley chapter of the ADK group. I'm filling in for Bill tonight because Bill is out, and the Vice Chair's job is to fill in when Bill is out, so I'm here. You get to put up with me. So the first thing is, as I said before, please make sure your cell phones are silent. Second thing is exits. Please look around. Notice that there's an exit to both your left and right, as well as behind you. Those are the official announcements I had to actually cover. We'll start out with a business meeting, and that will be the various leaders of the sections coming up and giving brief announcements for you. I see that we have a lineup of those who are planning to give announcements. So we'll start out with Jack Schrader.
Thanks, Dave. Jack Schrader, I'm chair of the Conservation Committee. One of our annual tasks for the past several years has been to coordinate the Winterfest, our display of snowshoeing and maybe sample and demonstrations of snowshoeing down at Minden Ponds. Winterfest this year, sponsored by the County of Monroe, is this Sunday, January 15th. And so what I'm asking for is anyone who has snowshoes to bring us samples, or people who want to volunteer and come and show up for half an hour, an hour, and communicate with the public about how we walk in the winter, how we hike, and how we enjoy just being outdoors during the winter time. Winterfest goes from 10 until 3. And if you show up any time between there, we'd appreciate any help and any samples that you bring. We expect the weather to be, what, in the mid-30s. There won't be any snow. In past years, we've given short demonstration hikes to anybody who wants to go on a 10 or 15-minute hike. But for the last 2 years, we've really been unable to do that. And I suspect we may have to change this into just a simple winter hike or mud hike in the future. But you're welcome to come, and if you want to sign up, I have a sign-up sheet, so see me after the main presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. Next up, Charlie Hellman, Waterways, I assume?
Okay, I'm not trying to lead a panel because it's a little too cold out for that. But we do have our Waterways holiday party this Saturday night. It's going to be at Lynn's house. Where's Lynn? If anybody needs her address, look in the Genesee and there's contact for her and myself. And come join us. Thanks.
Thanks, Charlie. Next up, Bill.
I'm Bill Schwingfirth, and just a quick update on the lodge trip. You'll find the information in the Genesee, and we're now full. And my contact information is there. We're accepting people on the wait list because we always have a few last-minute cancellations if people have personal issues or whatever. So, looking forward to this year's trip.
Thanks, Bill. Jackson.
On behalf of the Expo Committee, I'm inviting any of you who have not yet volunteered to help with this year's Expo in June to join us. We need volunteers, and more volunteers. Lots of volunteers. So if you think you have no talent, we have a job for you regardless. So don't worry about that. We'll find something at which you are brilliantly skilled, and we'll put you to work. So our next meeting is next Monday night at 6 p.m. Bookstore. How many of you know what a decal is? Come on, put your hands. Come on. Show and tell. Look at all these people know what decals are. Now, how many people have an ADK decal? I don't care where you put it. I mean, most people put it on one of the windows of their vehicle. So, if you need an ADK decal, for the princely sum of $3, you may have one or more of these to adorn as many objects in your life as you would like. Please see me at the bookstore after the program. Is anyone in need of a new High Peaks trail map? No? Okay. For those of you who are hikers and enjoy hiking throughout the Adirondacks, whether it's the High Peaks or not, you know, we have the main club offers the hiking guidebook series, so West Central and Central Trails, and for our dear friends in the southern portion of the state, the Catskill Trails, Eastern Trails. I don't have all the guidebooks right here. The rest are over there. And then, of course, this is the current new edition of the High Peaks Trail Guidebook. But for those of you who've been wondering for some time, gee, you know, they've done here, there, here, and here. Why have they not prepared a guidebook for the Western Adirondacks? Guess what's coming next month? Finally, there'll be a guidebook for the Western Adirondacks. So the current publication date is February 1. That may slip somewhat, but sometime within the next month or two at the latest, I will have the very new, never-before-seen Western guidebook. So for those of you who need that to complete your library and your arsenal of hiking trails, it'll be available quite soon. Before I finish, I just want to mention that Gene Binder, one of our members who is quite an expert on invasive species, has given us some material this evening on the hemlock woolly delta. And so if you are interested in learning more about this pest that is seriously going to damage, is already damaging and is going to cause considerably more damage to our beloved hemlock forests, you can get that information over here on the table, on the freebie table, next to the bookstore table. And please stop over and pick up something if you'd like. And if you'd like to speak to Gene in person, Gene, raise your hand. Gene's right here, his wife, Georgia. So he's available to speak to you if you have questions, and he can certainly talk to you about more than one of these serious pests. Okay, I have this over here. Philip Wilkins.
Thank you, Jackson.
You're welcome, Dave.
Before our guest speaker, there's one other thing we would like to do. That is the High Summit Honor Society inductees. Groups like ours, and especially ours, the Genesee Valley chapter of the Adirondack Mountain Club, is only as strong as the volunteers commit themselves to making it strong. Sometimes we end up having volunteers who go well beyond the expected level of commitment and really propel our organization forward. And we've seen them throughout the years. So in 2002, the Genesee Valley chapter instituted the High Summit Honor Society to recognize those volunteers who've really gone above and beyond the typical volunteer activities and really helped drive this chapter forward in immense ways. Once a year, we induct new members into the High Summit Honor Society, and tonight is that night for this year. The requirements are obviously going above and beyond the typical volunteer, but in addition, they should be actively involved in the Adirondack Mountain Club for at least 10 years in order for them to be nominated. We have 4 inductees tonight, and well, I will ask that those who have nominated these 4 inductees come up and explain why they were nominated and why the committee chose to induct them. I ask that the inductees or their representatives hold off till after all the nominations have been read, and then I'd like you to come up as a group so we can have a picture taken of you together. And you don't have to stand around here for a long period of time while you hear everybody else being introduced. So the first one is going to be presented by Shirley Thomas.
We're here tonight to honor Reed Kingsbury. While in Rochester, Reed worked at the Times-Union and Democrat-Chronicle newspaper, working his way up from suburban reporter to city editor to special projects investigations editor, and then to editor of the editorial page, before moving to Block Island, where he continued his passion for conservation by becoming president of the Block Island Conservancy, and later became a member and chair of the Brewster Conservation Commission when he moved to Cape Cod in 2003. Fraser Lane, co-owner and co-publisher of the Block Island Times, stated that Reed treated people with respect and compassion, mentored reporters, and was just a first-class human being. During Reed's career in journalism in Rochester, he joined the Genesee Valley chapter in 1970 and became vice chair in December of 1972, being responsible for monthly programs including an ascent of Mount McKinley in Alaska, indoor pool training sessions for kayaks, and introduction to the geology of the Adirondacks. Reed was also active in chairing the Publications Committee in 1972, and he helped to publish trail guides and other ADK publications. He ultimately became the chapter chair in November of 1973, before which he phoned a public opinion telegram from the executive committee to the governor, urging him to veto the Harris bill, which would delay consideration of the Adirondack private land plan for another year. He was appointed in 1989 by Governor Mario Cuomo to a state advisory commission to plan the future of the Adirondack Park. His major Adirondack interest, aside from wilderness preservation, was hiking. Reed was a 46er, and while climbing the high peaks, he became aware of what all the traffic on those mountains was doing to them. The success of the Adirondack Park Agency is essential to the interests of the Adirondack Mountain Club, he said. I hope as a club we can watchdog the work of the agency, encourage it where suitable, and badger it when needed. Reed died in 2010 at the age of 84 at his home in Cape Cod. Even in his final years of declining health, he continued to work as a freelance editor and columnist and to ardently support conservation efforts at the local, state, and federal levels. His love of camping, hiking, and kayaking lives on in his 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. His family still vacations every summer in the Adirondacks, enjoying the land that he worked so hard to protect.
Thank you, Shirley. Next, Peter College for our next inductee.
Our next inductee is Paul Weld, MD. And before I start, I just want to explain one thing. Both Paul Weld and Reed Kingsbury, who we just heard about, were active in this chapter more than 40 years ago. Normally, we don't necessarily go back that far to find our inductees for the High Summit Honor Society, but as you know, last year was our 50th anniversary. And this is actually the induction class of 2016 that we're talking about tonight. We decided last year to look back and see if there might have been some people who were very active and deserving in the club that may not have been inducted previously. And that's where Reed Kingsbury's name and Paul Weld's name came up. Paul Weld, MD, was the Genesee Valley Chapter Chair in 1971. He was a 3-time 46er and a frequent trip leader, at least into the mid-1980s. So he was involved in this chapter for probably at least 20 years, despite having contracted polio as a young man. Paul also wrote articles on multiple subjects for Adirondack Magazine. He was a bird expert and a longtime member of the Genesee Ornithological Society, who shared his knowledge with ADK. Professionally, Paul was an internist affiliated with Rochester General Hospital for 33 years, where he served as Director of Medical Education, Chief of Physical Medicine, and Director of the Division of Diagnostic Ultrasound. Paul Weld's first Adirondack high peak was Algonquin, climbed from Lake Polden during the summer of 1936 when he was 12 years old. A 1973 Genesee Valley chapter outing schedule listed him as the immediate past chairman of the chapter and had him co-leading trips that year to West Street, Marshall, and Seward and Seymour. His last high peak was Huff, climbed by itself in the late 1980s as part of his unsuccessful attempt to complete a 4th round of the 46. But after that, he continued to climb Baxter, Owl's Head, and the Crows until post-polio syndrome made extended walking impossible. Paul Weld unfortunately died in 2007. On a personal note, I knew Paul Weld, not well, but some, because I climbed my first high peaks in 1985 on a trip that he led. And I can tell you that he was very organized, and he was also very welcoming of newcomers, and did a great job of showing us the ropes, those of us who were not experienced with the peaks. For that reason, I'm especially pleased to induct Paul Weld, MD, into the High Summit Honor Society as part of the class of 2016. His daughters, Betsy and Mary Jean, are here tonight to receive this honor on Paul's behalf, and they'll be coming up with the group later.
Thanks, Peter. And Charlie Hellman.
So Nancy Donnie has been involved in our chapter for over 10 years, after discovering us at one of our outdoor expos. Over the years, she's been membership chair, education chair, programs chair, vice chair, and chair. She was also instrumental in setting up the marketing committee, the advertising committee, the media committee, always with great enthusiasm. Along the way, she helped us design our posters that you see out in the lobby right now, as well as for waterways, the PTFL patch, which is the highest honor for our waterways people. I would like to say that it's with my honor I get the opportunity to introduce my friend Nancy Downey.
Thanks, Charlie. And last, Jack Schroeder with his nomination.
Thanks, Dave. It's my honor to nominate Dave Schott for membership in the High Summit Honor Society. One of the things we will try to do is we'll try, since Dave has recently moved to Seattle and is currently working, we're trying to set up a Skype connection with him at the moment. That's what Larry Telly is doing at the moment. And we'll see once we have this connection going. I think we'll put him on the big screen, right, Larry? And so I look at Dave's profession is as a website designer and coordinator.
Doesn't look like Dave.
That sounds a little bit better. Well, we do have a photo of Dave Schott at the top with Dave's enthusiasm. One of the reasons he was nominated for this honor is because of the youthful enthusiasm. Could you hear that applause, Dave?
Oh, there we go. Now I see it.
Good. There are many things that Dave has done for us. He took over editorship of the Genesean a few years ago and turned that publication into just a first class with color photos, great content, a lot of information. He also ran the Younger Members Group almost by default. He got involved with the Younger Members and then decided as a co-leader, and then finally as a, and once one of the co-leaders had to move away, Dave took over full chair of the Younger Members Committee. He brought a whole host of other younger members into the club. And he also organized a lot of out-of-towns doings, especially the John Brooks Jamboree in the summer and the High Peaks Winter Weekend for younger members. He served as a motivational force for the club as a whole. Personally, one of the things I missed is that as head of the young members always met after the main program over at the Old Toad, and they were lucky enough to include those of us way beyond the younger member in that activity. Dave has been a strong biker for many years. I ran into him once down at Naples at the Grape Festival after he biked from his home in Pittsburgh. And it was late in the afternoon. I thought, Dave, you're not going to be able to get home tonight without the dog, except being in the dark. And naturally, he had no lights on his bike. And so I said to give him a ride. Dave has been known for his experience as a kayaker and for his ability to go out in all kinds of weather in all kinds of seas. Dave seemed to have loved going out to the Lake Ontario when the waves are very high at night as part of an organized activity. He's also been known to take his kayak and go sledding with it. A few years ago, Dave was a member of a group for National Trails Day. We went to West Canada Lakes and were clearing the trail, and this was an overnight trip. We'd spent a day and a half, and it was early in the spring, the first weekend in May, and naturally as you reach higher elevation, there was snow. We didn't get as far as we thought we would get to a lead-to, so instead we reached a saddle point along the trail, and we decided to camp there. So we did. The rest of us set up our tents, and Dave set up his tent and his other gear. And then, all in all, as we were eating supper, we noticed, where is Dave? We don't know where he is. And so we kind of looked around, we were quiet for a while. We heard a faint call, a faint yell from someone. What had happened was that Dave had gone off to take a leak, and he forgot where he was. And naturally, he did not have a whistle with him, and so he had a yell. We were amazed because this was a saddle point, and we were essentially at the crest. You go on the trail, you go down, either way, you go to the left or the right, north and south, you go uphill. So you thought, oh, this is really pretty easy to find. But no, there are other stories that can be told about Dave being lost in the woods. No, it's with great pleasure that Genesee Valley Club awards Dave membership in the High Summit Honor Society. Thanks very much, Dave.
I'd now like to have the inductees or their representatives come up to receive the plaque and to get a picture taken, please. Can we give the plaques out at this moment, please, so they can hold the plaques with the picture?
I'd like to introduce Reed's daughter, Laura Lutz, who is here to accept this award on behalf of her dad. Laura?
I mentioned earlier, but this is Betsy and Mary Jane, who are who are here on behalf of Paul Weld.
Excuse me. Dave, look out, there's a big UFO gonna land on your head. You'll all be grateful I left my big speech at home. But I did want to say, nothing I ever did was done without the loving support, patience, and understanding of a few amazing leaders of this club. So I want to thank them. And also, there's a lot of members that are not in leadership roles that would come to me and tell me what they needed and wanted out of the club. And I have to say that that is such a big role in this club, is to be a participant in saying something. So I think this is a great honor, and I really thank everybody.
I just would like to say that my father, his heart was in the Adirondacks, and he used his position in the newspaper he used his voice to let people know, let the public know, not to forget the Adirondacks and to preserve them.
for awarding him this honor, because I know he would be really pleased. And on an interesting note, actually, Reed Kingsbury did an article on my father in climbing the Adirondacks. I think it was in the mid-70s. He wrote an article about my father in the Adirondacks, so we still have a copy of that article.
And Dave, would you like to say a few words?
Okay, just heard. Do you hear that?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh. So, Dave, would you like to say a few words? Oh,
Hey, how is everyone?
You're doing well.
Well, I miss you guys. Not too much, but I miss you guys. Just 99 for a beautiful sunset landscape. Not yesterday.
We're breaking up and we can't really hear what you're saying at this point.
Okay, can you hear me now? Well, you guys get a view of my nose, I guess. But,
Great view though, Dave.
you'll get pretty chopped because it's heading outside. But, no, it's been just a wonderful time working with all of you guys and climbing mountains and handling everything. And I'm just really honored to be given.
Thanks, David. Watch out for the UFO. It's going to land on your head.
Thanks very much for joining us. Take care.
You take care too. See ya.
Jackson, can I pull you back one more time?
One more. You know, I don't know how I managed to forget this, but how many of you still need an ADK calendar? Well, at least a few I hope. I have 8 calendars left. They're down to $10, and please see me at the end of the program tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, Jackson. I'd now like to bring up Grace Fuller to introduce our guest speaker. Grace.
Hi. All I can say is you meet some of the nicest people in the most interesting places. Many years ago when I started working at the University of Rochester, I took the number 5 RTS bus to work every day. And over the course of the year or so, the first year or so that I worked there, I met a number of wonderful people, one of whom was Emil Homerin, who takes the bus to the university from Arundel every day when he teaches. He is right now the chair of religion and classics at the University of Rochester. He teaches a course called Speaking Stones among other things that he does, like speaking Arabic and translating Arabic and teaching all kinds of other exciting things. Anyway, I stumbled upon him as he was teaching his course one day when I was walking in Mount Hope Cemetery at lunch. And it was fascinating. So then later, when I became the chair for programs here, which I'm not doing now, but I was for a while, I was also working with someone who is not able to go on a tour of Mount Hope Cemetery because of some challenges. And I thought, if I could get Emil to come and do a program for us, it would be like a virtual tour of Mount Hope Cemetery for people who can't necessarily do it all by themselves. So he agreed to do it, and I'm really excited to introduce Emil Homerin, who is going to give us a presentation called Speaking Stones about some of the lesser known but very interesting stories about Mount Hope Cemetery.
So I have to be close to it. You can hear me, right? All right. Good. For over 15 years now, I've been teaching a course at the University of Rochester called Speaking Stones. This course examines gravestones and funerary architecture in Rochester's historic Mount Hope Cemetery. Students are introduced to Western funeral ritual practice with a particular focus on funerary architecture and cemeteries in the United States. They study the iconography and epigraphy of gravestones, that is, the pictures and the words that are on them, with case studies that are drawn from Mount Hope Cemetery, which serve to illuminate both Rochester's history and America's religious belief and practice. It looks better up there than on the screen here. Most Wednesday afternoons in the fall semester, Mount Hope Cemetery is my classroom, as my students and I roam over Mount Hope's 196 acres and walk nearly all of its 15 miles of roads and trails over the semester. In 1832, a cholera epidemic struck Rochester, killing 120 residents. By this time, the city of Rochester was 20 years old with 10,000 people, and the local cemeteries downtown were filling up. So the city fathers sought a site for a new cemetery 1.5 miles south of the downtown, and that became Mount Hope. Silas Cornell, the town's surveyor, laid out the cemetery, retaining its hills and dales that were etched there by the glaciers of the Ice Age, and Mount Hope opened for business in 1838. The old Gothic chapel was designed by Henry Surley and erected in 1862. The Moorish gazebo was added in 1872, and the Florentine fountain was added 3 years later in 1875. But don't let the name fool you. The first time I went there, they said it came from Florence, Italy. No, it's in the Florentine style, and it was cast at the Mott Iron Company in New York City. It still looks good, though. Around this time in 1874, the noted Rochester architect Andrew Jackson Warner designed the present gatehouse in the Gothic Revival style, complete with 6 stained glass windows. His son J. Foster Warner later designed the first crematory of Western New York that was attached to the chapel. You notice a smokestack. That's where the ovens are. They're still in there too, by the way. He went on then and designed the new chapel in 1911, 1912, which stands at the present, near the present cemetery office and crematory at the main entrance of the cemetery, which is across from the distillery restaurant today. Mount Hope contains over 300,000 tombstones, whose images and words speak to us today. Of course, there are many markers of historic importance, including the graves of Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass. But there are many other stones whose symbols and inscriptions express views of life, death, and immortality. As a professor of religion, what interests me most is how we see how funerary iconography and inscriptions in general help to link the living with the dead, with different ideas about existence and immortality. But before we talk about specific stones, we should reflect a moment about the use of gravestones and inscriptions in general. In the United States, we regard an inscribed stone for each dead person as a given, but this was generally not the norm in the past, nor for most people today. More often than not, the dead have been buried in temporary, often unmarked plots, which are then reused several years later. Earlier bones may be left in the soil, they may be removed and placed in an ossuary, or they just may be discarded. If the plot is not reused, it may be left unmarked, especially if the person were poor. Poverty and wealth were quite important to the Englishman John Weaver, who in 1631 suggested regulations for gravestones, monuments, and their epitaphs. The person of plebeian sort should be buried without tomb or stone or epitaph of any kind. Middling landowners, I think that's most of us, might have a stone, but no more. Gentry of higher rank could have their effigies sculpted on a pedestal, but without a coat of arms, while only nobles, princes, and kings have the right to a monumental tomb with a statue, alabaster, rich marble, and epitaphs exalting valor and virtue. As we will see, Weaver's regulations were obviously not followed in Mount Hope, but his ranks with their privilege reflect past practice to a great degree, as the nobility and the clergy were housed in the most sumptuous tombs. This was certainly the case for the ancient prehistoric tumulus tombs for kings, queens, princes, and princesses that we find in the Neolithic period all over Western Europe. And, of course, for the pyramids of Egypt. It's worth noting, too, that the Great Pyramids at Giza that you see here date from around 2500 BCE. They have few or no inscriptions. But beginning around 2300 BC, the inner walls of the pyramids, there are about 40 pyramids in Egypt still, the inner walls were inscribed with what today are called the pyramid texts, the oldest known Egyptian writings on death and the afterlife. Written with hieroglyphs, these texts are both images and words, consisting of charms, hymns, and prayers meant to ensure the felicitous and immortal life of the dead pharaoh, and by extension then, his subjects. For instance, here we find this inscription on the pyramid of Teti at Saqqara. Oho, rise up, O Teti. Take your head, collect your bones, gather your limbs, shake the earth from your flesh. Take your bread that rots not, take your beer that sours not. Stand at the gates that bar the common people. The gatekeeper comes out to you. He grasps your hand, takes you into heaven to your father Geb. He rejoices at your coming, gives you his hands, kisses you, caresses you, sets you before the stars, the imperishable stars, the spirits. Rise up, O Teti, you shall not die. But I want you to know, this inscription is on the inside of the pyramid. Yeah, I've gotten to see it because it's open now, but it's there. It was not meant for humans to read. It was meant for the gods and the dead to read. And that raises some rather important issues about who is addressed with an inscription. Here we see in ancient Egypt, two inscriptions were meant for the gods. Later, in Athens, the city's citizens were its object. Around the same time, the great tomb of King Mausolus at Halicarnassus in Asia Minor was both a private tomb and a public temple, which inspired mausoleums in Rome, where epitaphs proclaimed the deeds and offices of important politicians and soldiers. For the early Christian culture, inscriptions spoke to brothers and sisters in the faith and to God. While beginning in the Middle Ages, epitaphs in Northern Europe reflect the trauma of the plague and the terror of death and judgment, as we hear in the famous lines on the tomb of the Black Prince in Canterbury. I am that which you are. I was that which you are, and I am what you will be, that is, dead. As in this case, funerary inscriptions have been written as a warning for the living, while many other epitaphs seek to deal with the loss of grief, of death, and to reorder social relations and remember our loved ones. In additions, as we saw in Egypt and in the catacombs, inscriptions may aim to assist the deceased in the next world through prayers and blessings. So when you look at a gravestone, you need to ask some basic questions. Where are the images and writing to be found? Who speaks? Who is addressed? For what reason? Sometimes you can't answer these questions, but they're important to be asked, and I think we'll see that as we go on today. As in ancient Rome, many monuments in Mount Hope often proclaim the worldly success and status of the deceased. In a sense, their careers. This appears to be the case with the large monument for Michael Phillip that you see here, who is a carriage maker, owned a carriage factory, and was the mayor of Rochester in 1862-1863. The mourning figures atop suggest feelings of loss and sorrow, while the crowning cross below, that you see below the ladies there, proclaim that the deceased is among the saints in heaven, as noted in 1 Peter 5:4, and when the chief shepherd shall appear, ye shall receive a crown of glory that will not fade. Let's see how it came out. Oh, it's a little dark for y'all. Okay. Nearby is the monument for George Washington Aldrich Jr., lauding him for his service to the United States, it says here, as collector of the Port of New York. He died June 13, 1922. Now, this was a federal office, and the officer in charge of collecting import duties on foreign goods entering the United States by ship from the Port of New York. That is to say, he was a tax collector. Would you put that on your grave? I don't know. This is what you remember. Behind Aldrich's grave, we find one of a number of large crosses in Mount Hope. This one is a Celtic cross designed by the famous Rochester architect and designer Claude Bragdon. Like any Christian cross, this one alludes to a painful death. Yet since Jesus' body is nowhere to be found, the empty cross also suggests resurrection and victory over death. Further, the cross is a form of axis mundi, that is, a world axis that joins heaven and earth and the various, the horizons and the directions, the four directions. Particular to the Celts was the notion of thin places, where this world and the world of spirits were especially close, such as in burial grounds. And the cross might serve to mark these areas and to protect the living by keeping the spirits away. One of the most prominent features of the Celtic cross that you see here is the unbroken knot that goes all over the top of the monument. This symbolizes the lasting ties between the deceased and his or her loved ones, and above all, the firm tie or bound to God. Theologically speaking, the unbroken knot, without beginning, without end, proclaims that God was, is, and ever shall be. Now, right behind the cross there, you can see an obelisk, which is sacred, is the sacred symbol of the Egyptian sun god Ra. The obelisk is really a pyramid atop its own axis mundi. And these tall structures capture the last rays of the sun in the evening and the first rays of the sun at dawn. Not surprisingly, the sun is one of humanity's most ancient symbols of rebirth, and may well be the origin of the phoenix, the golden bird of myth, which dies in a fiery blaze at sunset to arise from its ashes at dawn. The obelisk became popular in Europe and America around 1800, when Napoleon brought one to Paris after his expedition to Egypt. In 1881, Cleopatra's Needle that came from Egypt was erected in Central Park. The obelisk style was also used especially for Revolutionary War memorials, such as those in Bennington, Vermont, Bunker Hill, and of course, the Washington Monument, built in 1833. And so when you find an obelisk in American cemeteries, it also has patriotic undertones. It's not only Egyptian revival. Now, many people in Victorian America viewed Egyptian and classical symbols as pagan, and so inappropriate to Christian burial grounds. But then Mount Hope has always been non-denominational and public. Further, because the abolitionist movement was strong in Rochester, Mount Hope has never been segregated, a real tribute to its founders. Unlike, say, a cemetery nearby here called Whitehaven. Think about it. Another prominent feature of Mount Hope are the many allegorical figures to be found on monuments throughout the cemetery, as we see here with this woman holding an anchor. There are many representations of this in Mount Hope. The anchor represents religious faith, which provides stability, confidence, and certainty. Other figures may point to heaven with a book that says "Gone Home." They may cling to a cross. And there are several examples of the weary pilgrim. This is one of two sculptures in Mount Hope by the famous Italian sculptor Nicola Papati, whose work graces St. Peter's in Rome and the Memorial Art Gallery in Rochester. There's a beautiful statue in the Memorial Art Gallery, which would be nice for you all to see because the marble hasn't been eaten by acid rain. And you can imagine then what this would have originally been like. The theme of the weary pilgrim may be based in part on the trips of the Apostle Paul, and represents the believer's quest to enter the heavenly Jerusalem, hence that slight gaze toward heaven. This particular sculpture was commissioned by for the plot of the Erickson and Perkins families, who were wealthy merchants and bankers. Some today, and certainly some of my students, think this is ostentatious. But we must recall, in the 1800s, there were no public art museums, and wealthy families were encouraged to commission such artworks and place them in cemeteries for the moral and religious edification of the larger public. And newspapers would write accounts of new funeral monuments that were put in Mount Hope and tell people, you need to go out and look at this. Indeed, this is one of the major characteristics of the Victorian or rural cemetery. That is, it was a museum. And this also shows changes from the earlier cemeteries in New England with a different kind of monument, as we see here on the right with the skull and crossbones. The Puritans and other Protestant groups in early America were direct spiritual descendants of the Northern European notions of sin, death, and damnation. And they were openly opposed to Catholicism and its hierarchies of priests and saints who got between the individual and God. As a result, images of Jesus, Mary, and the cross are rarely found on early stones in North America. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, more romantic notions of death moved the Puritan doom and gloom aside. The Transcendentalists in particular viewed God not as a stern and aloof judge, so much as a vital force in the universe, in nature itself. Death was no longer the trapdoor to hell, so often it was a portal to heaven. And so we see the rise of nature images on stones, like over here, of the weeping willow over the urn. And again, you'll see there's probably 50 examples of this in Mount Hope. The Puritan black slate stones had epitaphs such as, "Here lies the bones." And these are replaced by white marble stones bearing epitaphs such as, "Sacred to the memory." Bodies are no longer buried in coffins in graveyards. Rather, they are laid to rest in caskets in a cemetery, a place of sleep. And you'll find very few slate monuments in Mount Hope, and the ones you find there were usually moved from downtown. It's because this was founded in 1838, and the Puritans are sort of dying out. Also, another major feature of the Victorian cemetery is that feelings of sorrow are placed in a pastoral nature. And here we find another of humanity's oldest metaphors for immortality: people are plants. Just as a tree loses its leaves and appears to die in winter only to re-leaf again in spring, so too there is rebirth for the dead. This new appreciation for nature was a conscious element in the creation of the rural or Victorian cemeteries, of which Mount Hope was the third in the United States. And the planners of Mount Hope were able to avail themselves of the Ellwanger Berry Nursery and their abundant horticultural expertise that was right across the street. The provost house of the current University of Rochester was the Berry Estate. Moreover, in a time when there were no public parks either, the Victorian cemetery was a place to stroll and picnic, and Mount Hope even charged admission on holidays such as the 4th of July because so many people wanted to go there. Now, some of these Victorian elements are found on one of the most moving stones for a child in Mount Hope, that of Laura Knapp, who died in 1882 at the age of 3 years. The tree stump symbol that we see here was found earlier on New England stones and represents life cut off, and in this case, in early childhood. Also noteworthy are the various flowers and vines carefully carved on this stone. Let me see how it looks for you. Okay, you can see it. They include ivy, which goes all around the stump. Because ivy leaves are always green, they denote immortality, while ivy's clinging quality is associated with undying love and memory. The morning glory, which you see right here on that little cutoff right above the name, there's one of many morning glories, is often used for a child's monument because the morning glory blooms and dies in the same day, as does the daylily, which also represents faith and purity, as in the lilies of the field, they toil not, neither do they spin, as we hear in the Sermon on the Mount. But what I find most moving and striking on this life-size monument is the basket of flowers left atop the stump. Like the empty cross, this basket signifies or embodies absence, a painful loss of a dear one. Laura has gathered her flowers and left them in the basket, never to return. Yet as this monument declares a loss, it may also help to heal, as it allows the bereaved to place their sorrow in larger, more public contexts, to affirm that we must all die, even the young, even the innocent. No doubt for consolation, we find on this monument the words from the Gospel where Jesus blessed children and praised their innocent faith. Suffer little children to come unto me and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of God. Not far away from Laura Knapp is a very popular monument known as Our Willie. William P. Knight's monument is of zinc. He died a little after 1 year old of meningitis. Yes, it's made out of zinc. And there are a number of other zinc monuments to be found throughout Mount Hope Cemetery. All of them were manufactured by the Monumental Bronze Company of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and its subsidiaries. Their monument styles and products were advertised in catalogs and sold by salesmen throughout the United States and Canada. And this allowed customers to browse the catalogs and choose exactly what designs and decorations they wanted on their monuments. Willie's monument is known as the layer cake style, and it has there his name in the middle, and a lower panel depicting a lamb, and a higher panel depicting a rosebud, which symbolizes a child who dies and his life is not allowed to flower. Also quite common on children's stones are images of a hand, a child's hand, or in this case, a baby's hand. Among the inscriptions are the biblical verse regarding children, suffer little children to come unto me, and another one over in the Summerland. This was a real puzzler, till quite recently when I discovered that this is a reference to 19th century spiritualism, and specifically a book called A Stellar Key to the Summerland by Andrew Jackson Davis, quite a famous proponent of spiritualism and the idea that you could contact the spirits of the dead after they had died. He believed that the spirit world was in 6 levels, and the closest to Earth was the Summerland, where dead children continued to live and spiritually grow. A likeness of a small child prays in what appears to be a chapel at the top, and suggesting the traditional child's prayer, now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. That scared the hell out of me when I used to say that. In monumental catalogs, this is called Praying Samuel, based on Samuel in the Old Testament, and it came in 3 sizes, all based on the original marble sculpture you see here by the Italian sculptor Luigi Pampaloni. So that's where they're getting some of their inspiration, this monumental company. This and other zinc monuments were sold from 1874 till 1939, when the Monumental Bronze Company went out of business. The company did not do well despite its low prices and easy production of its monuments. Marble and granite dealers refused to carry metal monuments. Wonder why? And general consensus was that zinc was tacky. The monuments are hollow in the middle and turn a blue-gray color that you see here. This looks a little grayer, it's a little bluer in fact. And that's due to being exposed to air. Mount Auburn Cemetery, a very famous cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Spring Grove in Cincinnati refused to allow zinc statues and monuments. Nevertheless, Mount Hope permitted them, and ironically, they have weathered far better than their marble counterparts, which have been eaten by acid rain. And I'll show you another one of those in a little while. Now, child mortality is a tragic fact of life, and until the discovery of penicillin and a cure for tuberculosis, infant mortality was very high worldwide, and so we find many monuments for children. As we saw on Willie's monument, and we see again here, the lamb is often shown on these monuments, and it's easily the most common symbol in Mount Hope for adorning the graves of children. The book of Exodus talks about the lamb being sacrificed to save the Israelites at Passover. The 23rd Psalm portrays God, the Lord, as a caring shepherd. Similarly, in the New Testament, in the book of John, we find Jesus as the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep, who dies for our sins, and so forth. And so, taken together, the lamb on children's stones suggests their innocence, salvation, and protection with Jesus. Thoughts that might help to comfort grieving loved ones. Though we also find such epitaphs on these monuments as, "Our home is lonely now." And I don't know if you can read it over here on the left. "His little crib is empty, our hearts are empty too." An extraordinary monument for a child is that of Henry Lee Selden, whose father was a very famous judge in Rochester and in New York. His inscription reads, and again, I'm not sure you can see it very well, I'll read it to you. "He is not dead, this child of our affection, but gone unto that school where he no longer needs our poor protection, and Christ himself doth rule." These verses are from the elegy Resignation, composed by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And when I first read it here on this grave, I thought that Henry probably died in an accident because of the phrase, "our poor protection." It was just a theory. One of my students ran with it, and sure enough, Alex Woods discovered that Henry had drowned on his 11th birthday in Irondequoit Bay, where his father was teaching him to swim. He stepped off a sandbar, and they couldn't find him. This monument, it was a wealthy family, was designed by the famous Russian-American sculptor Robert Launitz, based on a daguerreotype taken of Henry in his school clothes, holding a pen and a book, as you see here. But in this post-mortem depiction, he leans on a tree stump covered in morning glories, which dies so soon. Other graves for children are less prominent, but no less jarring. Read it. Jonathan Paul Roberts, murdered. I miss you. I will love you forever, my baby, Mama. Others become shrines for families where they leave toys and they will leave pumpkins at Thanksgiving or at Halloween. They'll bring out Christmas trees. It's a way of remembrance. And still others seem to be abandoned and shunned. So this one is from 2005. That's the marker that the mortician puts there. Okay? It doesn't look like it's ever been visited again. On other monuments, especially for children, we find cherubim or small angels. And angels are found throughout the cemetery on family tombs as well. Some of the angels are female, some are male, some are yet to be determined. Perhaps the most interesting, it doesn't look good here. Oh, it looks pretty good here. Good. This is on the Kuhn family monument, a spectacular angel. Wilbur Barry Kuhn, who dies in 1926, was a successful manufacturer of shoes. His company, the Kuhn Company, was the Nike of its day. Why? He had a great idea. Let's make comfortable shoes for women. And he made a fortune. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? To commemorate his death, the family commissioned a massive 12-foot-high Art Deco monument in white granite from Tiffany Studios in New York City in 1927. This monument weighed so much, I believe it's 30 tons, that they had to design a special rail car to bring it to Rochester and then down Mount Hope Avenue, and then, I don't know how they got it through the gate in here. I still don't know that part. The epitaph on the back of the monument is Ecclesiastes 12:7. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Significantly, this angel is not sad or mourning, but pointing heavenward. Above her is a dove in flight, which may symbolize both the soul rising toward heaven and the Holy Spirit descending to earth. Another beautiful Art Deco monument in Mount Hope was designed by Claude Bragdon for the Seward family plot. This female figure is not an angel, however, but a robed woman holding a lamp and protecting a flame. This suggests another important development in the late 1800s, namely the discovery and serious scholarly study by Europeans and Americans of non-Western religions and their ideas, including reincarnation. Bragdon was well read in Eastern religions, and he wrote several books on the subject himself, including one entitled Old Lamps for New, in which he argues for reincarnation. Both Hinduism and Buddhism liken the body to a lamp or a candle which passes its flame to another lamp or candle at the time of death. Hence, your soul goes into a new body. Further, Bragdon believed that women were more attuned to the spiritual world than men, and he coined the term Delphic women for spiritually sensitive women, including his second wife, Eugenie, who may well have been the inspiration for this elegant monument. Now, just up the road from this monument is the gravestone of Susan Stone, who died of typhoid fever in 1899 at the age of 27. Okay, so I don't know how well you can see it. This is a marble that has suffered from acid rain. But in the middle at the top, there is a hand pointing up. Can you see the image? Very good, thank you. And then at the bottom part, there's the inscription, the epitaph. Can you read it? No. And if you go to Mount Hope today, you're not going to be able to read it either. This is due to the effects of the acid rain. But one of my students, Michelle Miller, persevered. We got a special kind of rubbing paper. Don't ever rub words on your own. You need to get permission from Mount Hope Cemetery because it can cause damage. There's a special paper. We got the permission, we rubbed it, and here's what we got. A tender wife's eyes past closed in death. A loving companion has resigned her breath. My husband mourns and with me frets the stroke. On earth our Savior has our connection broke. Yet we may meet in heaven. This stone speaks of the broken connection between the living and the dead. But the image of the finger pointing heavenward and the words claim an undying bond. Death does indeed bring about biological and psychic annihilation, but life includes symbolic perceptions of connections that precede and outlast death. What is at stake is the human struggle to combine awareness of death and loss with the capacity to feel, love, transcend, and become whole. Graveyards and cemeteries have always been major sites for this struggle, and they help to resolve three crucial issues at death: the removal of the corpse from the realm of the living, the assertion of the dead's status after death, in this case she's in heaven, and resolution of grief. How do we place our sorrow? Formal funerals, often of a religious nature, help individuals to place this sorrow in larger, more public contexts, and thereby to share and make sense of their grief. This helps to turn feelings of loss and grief into a more positive force to move on. Frequently, this is done through words and symbols on gravestones and monuments that say no to death and yes to life. Further, by using a rhetoric of death as transformation, death becomes sleep, a journey, a gateway, or some other form leading to transcendence. It's not the end of the line, okay? It's maybe a new beginning. And so what we see, in fact, working on gravestones are different forms or modes of what we call symbolic immortality. There are four major modes that we find worldwide. First, and probably easiest to understand, is the biological mode, the family continuity of living on in sons and daughters, nieces and nephews, and extending beyond the immediate family to the clan or the tribe, maybe even to the nation and the human race itself. This is quite apparent in the many references you will see in Mount Hope to family relationships on a stone: father, brother, sister, mother, wife. You know, my students come out and go, oh, look, she was the wife. I mean, it's like she's always being degraded. And I say, you don't get it. You've got to figure, this is about a larger relationship. They get it by the time the class is over. We also see this in Jewish plots. In Christian, there's certain congregations have plots. In World War I, World War II, Civil War, military, veterans plots, firemen's plots. You're part of a larger group. The second mode of symbolic immortality is theological. This also is fairly easy to understand: concepts or beliefs of the existence after death, such as transmigration of the soul, or notions of heaven and hell. Now, I haven't seen any stones in Mount Hope where they said, poor guy's in heaven. I've seen that in New England, I've seen that in New Hampshire. He was a ne'er-do-well, God rest his soul, but I don't think so. But this one, we don't see that here. This is a Victorian cemetery, they're a little more upbeat, okay? Usually these systems have an idea or a doctrine of an immortal soul or self which exists independent of the corruptible body, so you move on. There's also the creative mode of symbolic immortality, living on in one's work, in art, music, literature, or craftsmanship, or in one's students, and the lives of others touched by our work. And you'll see a number of gravestones in Mount Hope that have painter's palettes, or a harp, or a violin, or a literary reference, so that this is how they're going on in that fashion. And then a newer one that we see is called ecological, of living on in some form in the universe, perhaps in a new, possibly non-human form. And we see this in a number of more recent graves, I'd say probably dating from the 1970s and the 80s, when they could do a lot of laser etching, where they'll put a nature scene on the grave with deer and water and so on. That somehow you're living on. We all come from stardust, and to stardust we return. So many of the gravestones and monuments in Mount Hope draw on these modes of symbolic immortality, whether with references to family relationships, the Star of David, Christ and the cross, or references to sun and light, flora and fauna, and so forth. But whatever the case, nearly every gravestone, I would argue all gravestones, have a story to tell if one can take the time to listen and discover it. And I want to finish with a few examples. including the following epitaph for Letitia Van Wyck Knapp, who died in 1912. Warm summer sun, shine kindly here. Warm southern wind, blow softly here. Green sod above, lie light, lie light. Good night, dear heart, good night, good night. In this epitaph, the sun serves as a symbol of life, as does the green grass. And death is rhetorically transformed into sleep, hence the final wish, good night, dear heart, good night, good night. Now, this is by no means a common inscription, but it's not unique either. We find this epitaph a few years earlier on the stone of Olivia Susan Clemens in Woodlawn Cemetery, Elmira, New York. Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, was living in Elmira when his daughter died, and he admired these verses by the Australian poet Robert Richardson, and so had them inscribed on his young daughter's grave, but with a major change. He changed the word northern to southern, since the warm wind blows from the opposite direction above the equator. No doubt the Clemens epitaph was printed in the newspaper and so caught the attention of the nation. He was famous after all. And that probably the Van Wyck Knapp family saw it and later used it on Letitia's tomb. This 12-foot tall monument is known as a stele, and it commemorates Colonel Nathan Pond and his two wives, Julia Beecher, she died in 1887, and his second wife, Susan Moore, who died in 1943. He wasn't a big news. Pond led the Union Army's first colored cavalry in the Civil War, and later owned the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. The monument has an oval-shaped top carved in the classical Greek Revival style. The stele bears palmettes surrounding a poppy, an ancient Mediterranean symbol for eternal sleep and consolation. The plants carved in the lower left and right sides are acanthus leaves, which appear in Greek art and funeral steles as early as the 4th century BC, including one currently in the British Museum, which may have inspired this monument. After my student Julia Dugan published her article on Nathan Pond, I received an email from a Pond descendant praising the article, but with a question. Where was her great-great-grandmother buried? You see, Pond was married 3 times, but his first wife was not buried in Mount Hope, so we don't know where she rests today. Whoops, sorry. The Jewish sections in Mount Hope are filled with many striking monuments, including this one for Hyman Commissar and his wife Jeanette in the Temple Beth Kodesh Hall. My student Sarah Harvey was struck by the unusual shape of the stone, which appeared to be a bench. Sure enough, she learned that this monument was designed to be a bench, a place to rest and contemplate. The monument was designed by the Commissar's architect son Earl and his wife Mimi. The Commissar gravestone is made out of pink granite and consists of 4 parts. There is the seat, obviously, and then there is the back. Let's see. The back has the name Commissar, and then the inscription, "Together they built a timeless sanctuary for love, freedom, and creativity." On the sides of the seat are 2 rectangular pieces of stone and smaller cubes on top of them, resembling perhaps people. The one on the right is taller and skinnier and says Hyman and 1985. Below the date, where the seat meets the side of the stone, there is a strip of granite missing. Down there, can you see that? There's a strip missing. That represents the arm he lost in World War I. Yeah, this is what his son was doing. And then we have the other part of the stone on the left that says Jeanette. Her death date, 1983, and this side of the stone is shorter and wider. Those are not my words, but the architect's description of his mother. I mean, here is a second example of the weary pilgrim. Okay. This is the life-size monument for Louis Lewison, who dies in 1909, and it reads, "Weary pilgrim, period. I await the opening of the heavenly gate." A Jewish immigrant to the U.S., Lewison became a very successful cloth merchant in the Rochester area, and so was able to commission this monument before he died, which was normally the case, by the way. You commission the monument often before you die. There are two very noteworthy elements to the monument that my student Brian Furness discovered. First, Brian found a rare photo of Lewison which clearly matches the face of the builder. Second, the sculpture was signed. It's right down there behind the foot, okay? And it said, F. Heister, Rochester, New York. The sculptor was Frank Heister, who worked at the Trott Monument Company on Mount Hope Avenue, where Pellegrino's Deli is today. Only rarely, I bet you maybe I got a dozen cases max, that I can show you a stone that is signed. Most stone carvers for grave monuments never sign their work, which is really sad. But Heister did it. And so we were able to find out who did it. Brian, my student, also came upon the story of Heister's last day at work. Heister shot himself with a new revolver, told his wife she would be better off without him, sought storeroom from suicide. Frank Heister, a monument carver and designer, committed suicide at noon yesterday at Trott's Marble Works, corner of Mount Hope Avenue and Stewart Street, by shooting himself through the heart with a revolver. Despondency is the only known reason for his act. In the morning, he told his wife she would be better off with him dead. Then he walked through Mount Hope looking for a place to end his life. He evidently did not find a place that just suited him, and he returned to Mr. Trott's shop, went upstairs to the storeroom, and fired the fatal shot. Okay, Brian and I disagree with this. We don't think he went to Mount Hope to find a place to shoot himself, but to look at his masterpiece one last time. Now, I don't want to end on this depressing note. So I'm going to close with this beauty. This is the monument for Minnie Snyder Buff, 1871-1942. In the year 2000, this monument caught the eye of my student, Kelly Watts, who was herself an art student. Kelly found very little information about Minnie. She was a stenographer, she was married, she lived in Brighton. That was it. But Kelly recognized that this is a ceramic monument made of red clay with a fine glaze which allowed for a full range of color. This is the only one like it in London. She noted that every leaf of every fern is carved and every vein on every leaf is shown, and that the monument was carved to give it a rich texture and depth. The poem on the monument reads, "Years fly, flowers bloom and die, old days, old ways pass by, love stays." This is a modern take on the classical Latin epitaph, "Fugit ora," time flies. Kelly thought the flowers in the front of the monument signifies life's beauty and fragility, and also symbolic immortality in the form of plants and nature. Moreover, as the poem states, throughout the life cycles and changes, there is one constant that never falters, love. The green ferns, they cover the entire back of the monument, and the sides and the front, as you can see up there under the hands, are green, and so may represent love and life. You also have going across the top of the stone, ivy that clings, signifying undying love and memory. But of course, the most notable feature of that stone are those two lifelike hands, the pair of hands that reach out from the front. They're realistic, both in size and depth, and they can symbolize the close human relationships that Minnie left behind. The hands gently and lovingly hold the flowers like memories close to the heart. One might even understand the two hands as Mother Nature, embracing Minnie and her loved ones. And so the images and words offer comfort, reminding us of the natural cycle of life and death. Overall, this monument has wonderful associations to the natural world and the life cycle here on Earth. The fact that the monument was made by human hands out of clay a material that comes from the earth, suggests the importance of nature to both Minnie Snyder and her loved ones. And so you see, when facts about the deceased are few, the monument itself may tell a story. And Kelly's interpretations in 2000 were confirmed in 2015 because one of Minnie's descendants was doing online research for a genealogy and found Kelly Watt's article online at my website. And they contacted us and they filled in the gap. Sometimes I love the web. The ceramic monument was cast by Linda Skadden, a clay artist in Philadelphia, for her great-aunt Minnie in 1995. Minnie had raised her 4 nieces after their mother died and their father abandoned them in Buffalo. Minnie brought them to Rochester, put all 4 of her nieces through school, including the University of Rochester. And each niece is represented by a flower in Minnie's hands. Linda Skadden also told us that she found the poem on a sundial in a garden. Thank you.
Dr. Homerin, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. Will you accept a couple of questions? Sure. We have a couple of minutes.
Yes?
You had intimated that Wayhaven Cemetery, the origin of that, if possible, racist overtones?
Yeah, it was segregated until 1978.
Oh, was that your segregated?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I'd rather live on Mount Bailey. Riverside is nice too, which if you haven't been there, Riverside is another municipal cemetery. It's across from Holy Sepulchre, which is also in the Victorian rural side. Yes, sir.
With several 100,000 monuments, how do your students select the ones for their coursework?
Okay. Well, so we go out, we start on Wednesdays, and we take a different section each time, and I go over different grades in that section. And then we're out there from 2 to about 4:30 on Wednesdays, and I usually give them the last half hour to roam. As long as they have maps so they don't get lost. It's easy to get lost. And I say, you need to start looking because they all know, they know the website is a famous course now. 35 of my students have published their papers. So this is a big deal. They get it. And so they look and they can't do a stone that's been done, usually. Once in a while they can, if they're a family member. And then they have to run it by me for approval. And so we work on that. So and sometimes you get dead ends. I mean, I had one student who picked a monument, and it said she was an early woman doctor in Rochester. And she thought, wonderful, there'll be a lot of information. Well, after she retired, she moved to Minnesota, and there was no obituary or anything. Then another student, Melissa Squires, chooses this other stone because it has this beautiful lily on it, and it ends up, this is Dolly, I gotta remember her name. She was a friend of Susan B. Anthony, who was the first woman doctor in America. So sometimes you don't know what you're going to hit, and like Kelly, she just loved the monument, but she couldn't find anything about the family. So those are the kind of fun things that happen. Yes, sir?
What pays the ongoing maintenance? I remember my father getting a bill for some ancestor maybe in the 60s, but that wasn't going to go in perpetuity.
No, that's changed. On that CD I showed you by Pond, on one side it says in perpetuity, which means that they gave money so that it'd be taken care of forever. But of course, it's a municipal cemetery. This is a city cemetery, and that money was gone in the 70s when the city was broke and they were using the money that was supposed to be for the dead for the living. And so now the only time you're going to get a bill is if you have a mausoleum and maybe it was broken into and that they need repairs. But for the most part, it's done by the city now. The other people that also do repairs are the Friends of Mount Hope Cemetery. Some of you may be members. I'm a trustee, and they, like the Rao monuments, we spent $19,000, I think it was, renovating it. So there's monies that have been collected. The tours we give are free. Well, no, they're not free, they're charged. We don't get any for it. And that money goes to Mount Hope, or the Friends of Mount Hope, and so we have a number of projects to raise graves. Usually they're not knocked over by vandalism, it's the weather, the cold weather, or the corrosion of the rings inside so that the monument falls off, and so we're involved in helping that. Yes?
I'm curious about the locations of the cemeteries that you mentioned in the city.
Mm-hmm. They're gone. So there was the Buffalo Street Cemetery, the Monroe Street Cemetery, and Grove Street Cemetery. They were all moved, and they're right up there. See those lines? It says right there. Removals, Brighton, and one of those. So they were put in towards the back of the cemetery that overlooks the university. So that's what they've done with most of those. Once in a while you can still come upon some graves. In Irondequoit, for instance, there's still a cemetery between 104, and there's also a cemetery near actually St. Paul Avenue, but they're very small. It's like Hosea Rogers and things like this. You'll still find little pieces, but not much. Yes?
So any estimate of how many people came on election day to visit the museum?
No, I don't know. Quite a few. They were coming in the morning, and I come in on the bus, as Grace said, I'm usually coming in about 20 till 7, and it was already, and they were opening the gates early to let them in. So it was thousands.
Actually, Emil, I was there.
Okay.
And it was about 3 hours before I got to the front of the line and put my sticker on the road.
You know, I had taken some friends into Mount Hope the week before, and they knew a different way to get in, so they got theirs on their back quicker than you did.
Was that fired and then glazed to keep the colors?
Yeah, that's what we think, yeah. So, I mean, you know, we'll see. I mean, they must have, we don't have details, because we had checked the plot books in the office, but they would have probably had to get special permission to put that one in there. The cemetery can deny you if you don't meet certain qualifications. There should be no wood monuments, for instance. And if they don't like the inscription, or if they think it's inappropriate, or the image is inappropriate, they can say no. So we have a lot of pointing hands, right? We don't have any of those yet. No, it's pretty amazing. Yeah. I use it all. Grace has been there too. I go to that one a lot because it's a unique stone, and it's in fabulous condition. It was 95. It was cast in 95. Yeah. Lewis Henry Morgan, we're talking about a mausoleum that was actually located near the Delphic woman that we saw. And this is for the father of anthropology at the University of Rochester. And, you know, we all remember Susan B. Anthony for all she did for the Women's College, but a lot of people forget there were other people involved too, including Lewis Henry Morgan, who had 2 daughters who died before they reached, I think they were in high school when they died, and he gave much of his estate for the Women's College. Now, it's made out of Medina sandstone. It's in a Victorian revival style, and it's actually on 2 floors. And so you would have gone into a room that was like a memorial room, then you would go down a spiral staircase to where the graves are. But there was a lot of vandalism. I have never been inside, but I've seen pictures and the description. And there had been a lot of vandalism in the 70s and 80s. Somebody drove a pickup truck and put a chain on the door and tried to pull it off. And there was rumors that there were treasures in there. Other people said maybe it was American Indians kind of like getting back at him, though he was a member, an honorary member of a tribe and had done a lot of good work on Indian families. We just don't know. But then they just cemented it up. Yeah. And you'll see a lot of that with mausoleums in some parts of Mount Hope where they've been cemented over. That means that they're full, there are no family members left, or that they just did that to stop vandalism.
Have your students found vandalism yet been discovered by the cemeteries?
Oh yeah, we find it and we report it. So there was a beautiful monument. It's for a family who the His 5 children who all died in the same week of diphtheria. And so you have the monument, and in the center of the monument was a life-size rabbit in white, just beautiful. And one day I'm walking through, and it's gone. You know, and I walk through every day, so I reported it. There is a high level of theft of animal monuments that people think that they'd be fun to have as lawn ornaments. So one of the most famous is a bronze dog, Carlo. Okay, and he's life-size dog who sits outside the mausoleum, and he used to be there by the north gate, the gatehouse that I showed you. And one day Carlo disappeared, and it was, people realized, well, it's bronze, that's worth a lot of money, so we're never going to see Carlo again. But then 2 members of the Friends of Mount Hope on the board of trustees were out in Henrietta at a bar. You know, they were meeting for a drink, and they went out into the back patio, you know, to be outside. It was a warm day, and one looked at the other and said, Carlo. They called the police came, the owner said, I just bought it from a guy, you can have it back, I didn't steal it. So now it's in that gatehouse that during tours that Mount Hope, the Friends of Mount Hope offer, you can go in the gatehouse, you can see Carlo, you can see stained glass windows. It'd be well worth your trouble to do that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Are there other cemeteries? The equivalent of maybe 19th, 18th century graves close to Rochester? I think maybe a Geneseo and
Geneseo has one that's okay. There's one at Honeyway Falls. Yeah, they'll be around. Syracuse, you know, Albany, all the major cities. This was often referred to. The Victorian Cemetery was referred to as the last great necessity. To be a great city, you needed one of these cemeteries. It was a place. It was a place for your history. It was a public park. It was a museum. It was a horticultural, you know, paradise. And so this is. And so there are other modest examples, and sometimes you can come to you can find real gems of gravestones and monuments. But you know, Mount Hope is right behind the University of Rochester, and it was a terrific opportunity. I still think I'm the only person to teach a course in a cemetery in the United States. I was covered by the Chronicle of Higher Education once. There's the American Association of Gravestone Studies that invited me to come and talk about this class. And I'm still trying to get, urge others, but I think a lot of times it's just the logistics. Yes?
How familiar are you with King's Landing Cemetery?
No, where is it?
Right there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.